How's everybody doing? You guys excited to get this started? My name is Juan Martinez. I'm the Nevada Field Director also for the LIBRE Initiative here in Las Vegas and Nevada. We'd like to thank St. Christopher for their generosity in offering the venue. So can we get a hand of applause for St. Christopher? Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the students for coming out and the great speech by their president. I was actually born and raised here. I went to J.D. Smith and I attended St. Christopher as a kid, so I'm really humbled by everything that's here and the community coming out to hear from Marco Rubio. I'd also like to thank Marco Rubio for coming out, and I'm getting ready to, are we good? I'd like to introduce Daniel Garza. He's our Executive Director of the LIBRE Initiative. He started out working in the fields when he was a young boy and worked his way up to the White House, our administrating at the White House. Daniel Garza, everyone.
Hello, good day. Terrific, thank you. Juan, estás sudando, eh? Getting warm? Well, thank you so much for being here today. It is an absolute pleasure and an honor, and really a privilege that you could give us your Saturday morning to be with us, to really hear directly from folks who are influencing policy, who are driving ideas that impact us every day. And sometimes those impacts can be beneficial to a society, and sometimes those impacts can be consequential. So ideas matter. Ideas have consequences. And at the LIBRE Initiative, we feel that the Latino community is part of the solution, has answers, that we can bring to bear our ideas, our perspective, our talents, our skills to make America stronger and make it better. At the same time, we also want to make sure that we are at the table when we're discussing policy, when we're talking about ideas that are changing America. Either we're making it stronger and we're growing the private sector, or we are making it weaker and really centralizing power and control in Washington, D.C. That matters in your lives, every day in our lives. And the opportunities that it is creating or that it is hindering for yourself, for your family, and generations to come. So we're very pleased to have with us today Senator Marco Rubio, who has become one of the most influential voices on Capitol Hill, who is at the tip of the spear when we're talking about driving policy and important decisions that are being made. I want to give an introduction to the senator. His parents came to the U.S. from Cuba in 1956 and worked their way to the middle class. His father as a bartender in hotels and his mom as a maid, cashier, and retail clerk. In fact, Senator Rubio lived from ages 8 to 14 in a neighborhood right off the Las Vegas Strip and even attended right here, St. Christopher's. He sat in the very seats that your children sit in today, here in St. Christopher's. Senator Rubio started as a city commissioner for West Miami before being elected to the Florida House of Representatives in 2000, and then speaker in November 2006. He authored the book 100 Innovative Ways for Florida's Future. 100 Innovative Ideas for Florida's Future, which was based on conversations with Floridians around the state. And as speaker, he helped enact many of the ideas on that book. He had a strong record of advancing limited government policies at the state level, and after his speakership in Florida, he wanted to take his ideas for conservative reform to Washington, D.C. Since his time in the Senate, he has fought against big government, stood up to Obamacare, and opposed budgets that leads to more debt at the expense of job creation and long-term prosperity. Es importantísimo que nosotros como padres tengan los hijos que nos estamos capacitando, que están preparados para tener puestos como los ha tenido el senador Rubio. He serves in the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, the Committee on Foreign Relations, the Select Committee on Intelligence, and the Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. Senator Rubio is a vocal advocate of restoring the American dream through the 21st century conservative reforms. Señores y señoras, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Senator Marco Rubio.
Do you want me to speak first? Or you want me to just go through? Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be back. I say back because I actually went to school here for about a month. All my friends are going to school across the street at J.D. Smith, so I could see them through the fence. And I was pressuring my parents to let me go back to school with my friends. I wish they would have let me stay, though. It's great to be back here. It's great to be, I always love coming back to Southern Nevada, where I have a lot of family that still lives here. As we were driving in, I just drove by the pool where I learned how to swim. Just a few, 2 blocks away. And it's amazing, I learned how to swim in the desert. But I learned a lot of what I know about the American dream in Southern Nevada. My father was a bartender at Sam's Town, and my mother was a maid at the Imperial Palace. And working in those jobs, they were able to be successful people. They weren't rich, they weren't famous, but they were successful people. Those jobs paid them enough so that they could own a home in a stable and safe neighborhood not far from where we stand today. They were able to retire with dignity and security, and they were able to leave all 4 of their children better off than themselves. And the reason why I tell you that story is because that's what makes us different as a country. Every country in the world has rich people. Even the poorest country in the world has rich people. What makes America different is that here, people that will never be rich are successful, are able to achieve happiness. And if we ever lose that, if we ever become a country where that's not possible, we're not special anymore. We'll still be a powerful country and an important country, but we will stop being special. And so the job of those of us who serve in public office is to ensure that we always remain a country where that opportunity is available for people. And today it's gotten harder than ever. And a lot of it is because of policies of our government. Some of it is because the world has changed, the economy has changed. Everything costs more, and the jobs just don't pay enough. But a lot of it is because we have government policies that, quite frankly, have not allowed this economy to grow fast enough and create better paying jobs. Because we have an outdated higher education system, which is a monopoly. And I hope we'll have a chance to talk about that today. Some of the best paying jobs of the 21st century require more than high school but less than 4 years of college, and we don't teach kids to do that work anymore. So we have a shortage of welders and plumbers and airplane mechanics. And I don't understand it because a welder makes a lot more money than a philosopher. And yet we graduate a lot of people with philosophy degrees, and there's nothing wrong with it, I suppose, but not nearly enough people to be welders. We've made higher education too expensive. Think about it for a moment if you're a single mom trying to raise your kids on your own and you're making $12 an hour as a receptionist. And the only way you're ever going to get a raise is to become a paralegal, but you can't go back to school because you have to work full-time and raise a family. And that's why I think we have to open up higher education to have more flexible options that give people credit for what they've already learned and allow them to learn the rest online, on weekends, from a variety of different sources. We're still going to have traditional four-year colleges. We have to. How we're going to have college football. But we can't keep letting people borrow for degrees that don't lead to jobs. You know, I myself owed over $100,000 in student loans. And I never would have paid that off had I not written a book, which is now available on paperback if you're interested. But these are the impediments to upward mobility. An economy that isn't creating better paying jobs, a higher education system that's too expensive or inaccessible. And the result is we are leaving people behind. There are people being locked out of the American dream and the American promise. And if we lose that, we stop being a special country. That's why I want to thank the LIBRE Initiative for what they're doing in connecting the American dream to the principles of free enterprise and limited government. And I'll just close with this. There's a lie out there that's been told in politics for a long time. And that is that big government is good for the people who are trying to make it. It's actually the direct opposite, and I can prove it to you. Go anywhere in the world where the government dominates the economy. Go to any country on this planet where the government dominates the economy, and here's what you're going to find. I promise you, here's what you're going to find. You're going to find that it's the same families and the same companies every generation after every generation. Everyone else is stuck. In countries where the government dominates the economy, you are stuck. You can only be what your parents were before you. So if your parents were rich or famous, that's great news. And if your parents weren't, no matter how hard you work, you got to get really lucky. You know why that happens? Because when the government dominates the economy, the people that can afford to influence the government, they win. And everybody else is stuck. In those places, the employee never becomes the employer. The worker never becomes the business owner. We can never be that kind of country. Now, there's a role for government. We all want our water to be clean. We want to make sure our airplanes take off and land, that the landing gear works. There's a role for regulation in government. But when it gets too big, the people with access to power use government. And they use it to their benefit and to everyone else's detriment. And we can never become that kind of country. That's called corporatism. That's called cronyism. And we can never allow ourselves to become that kind of country. It's happening here too. You know all these regulations? You know who loves all these regulations sometimes? The big businesses. Because they use it to keep the small business out of business. They know that you can't start a business out of the spare bedroom of your home if you have to fill out 15 permits and hire lawyers and lobbyists. And they love it, because that means they have no competition. You see it happen over and over and over again. So I thank LIBRE for talking about these things, because these are important. These are the impediments to upward mobility. Look, guys, the people that have made it, the people that are rich and powerful, they're going to be all right. All they want to do, is, for the most part, is be left alone and treated fairly. The people we have to be fighting for are the people who are trying to make it. And not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the essence of who we are as a country and as a people. If we ever lose the American dream, we stop being special, and we cannot allow that to happen. ¿Vamos a hablar un poco en español hoy o no?
Como usted quiera.
Bueno, vamos a hacer algo también en español. Le agradezco que estén aquí, y si Dios quiere vamos a tener una oportunidad también de hablar un poquito en español. También aprendí bastante español en Las Vegas cuando estaba viviendo aquí. So, well, thank you very much. I look forward to talking to you. All right, we're going to sit here.
Well, first of all, Senator, thank you so much for being with us today and providing an opportunity to have a dialogue and a discussion with the Latino community here in Las Vegas. You know, one of the issues that is so critical to us is education. And the issue of school choice is important for a majority of Hispanic parents who say that they would rather not send their children to public school. And Hispanic parents overwhelmingly support a variety of school choice options. Should other states follow Nevada's lead in adopting universal school choice, and what role does the government play in this debate?
Yes, well, look, K through 12 education belongs at the state level. You don't want the federal government involved in K through 12 education. I promise you, you don't want the federal government involved. They will take it over. They will tell you what to do. And here's why it's a problem. If I'm a parent, I am a parent, and I don't like what the school is teaching my children, I can go see the school board. I can go see the principal. I can go see my state legislator. If the federal government is telling the school district what to do, you try to go to Washington and talk to the Department of Education, you won't find anyone. There won't be anyone there to talk to you or to influence. So K through 12 belongs at the local level. And that's where states should be opening up opportunities for school choice. Let me tell you what's an outrage. The only people in America that can't choose where their kids go to school are poor people. Rich people send their kids to any school they want. Upper middle class people, they send kids, or they move to a better neighborhood with a better school. Poor people in many parts of this country are condemned. They are stuck having to send their kids to the school the government tells them, even if the school is failing, even if the school is dangerous, even if the school has become a dumping ground for all the teachers that have 2 years left to retire and don't want to teach anymore. And that's immoral. That is wrong. So I do support school choice. There is something the federal government can do in this regard, and it's something that copies something we have in Florida. It's called an opportunity scholarship. What the Florida law says that a company that owes taxes to the government can, instead of giving part of those taxes to the government, they can give part of those taxes to a private scholarship organization who in turn gives scholarships to needy families to send their kids to a better school. We have thousands of kids in Florida today that go to a private school using a scholarship from this organization. And I have filed a bill that also allows companies who owe federal corporate taxes to donate part of that to a local scholarship organization who in turn can open the way to provide scholarships to working families so they can send their kids to a school like this or a school of their choice. I do believe strongly in school choice. And ultimately, there are some really good public schools, and if parents are happy in the public school, they can go to school there. But if they want to put their kids in a better learning environment, whether it's faith-based or just programs you like better, every parent in America should be able to choose the school their children go to, no matter how much or how little they make.
Well, thank you for that full-throated defense of school choice. Let me also add that you will also get an opportunity to get your questions answered, so make sure that you fill out, you know, the little card with
it's
the
not my
questions.
imagination. It's hot, right?
It
okay,
is.
Okay, I thought either that or I have high blood
Neil.
pressure. But even the camera guys are doing it, so all right.
Yeah, so over the course of the Obama administration, the federal debt has grown already by $8 trillion. To be fair, that's added on to the $10 trillion that was already there. How can we balance the need to cut taxes with the need to pay down the debt without forcing a government shutdown and keeping that would allow us to keep the spending cap?
Yeah, I want to be fair. We have a bipartisan debt. People say there's no bipartisanship. We have a bipartisan debt. Okay, both parties built up that debt. And let me tell you what's creating the debt. Let me tell you what doesn't create the debt. It's not foreign aid. Foreign aid is less than 1% of our budget. It's not defense spending. That's not what's driving our debt. Our debt is being driven by the way Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid are structured for future generations. That's what's driving the debt. Now, I'm from Florida. There's a lot of people in Florida on Medicare and Social Security. You might not know that, but there's a lot of people in Florida on Medicare and Social Security, and one of them is my mother. I'm against any changes that are bad for my mother. I'll tell you right now. And here's the good news. And here's the really good news. We can save Social Security and Medicare and balance our budget, and we don't have to change Social Security and Medicare for my mother or people like her or people that are about to retire. But here's the truth. It's going to look different for me. I'm 44. I feel 45, but I'm 44. My Medicare and Social Security is going to be different than my parents'. It either is not going to exist or it's going to work differently. And you know what I mean by that? I'm going to have to retire a year later than they did. The truth is I probably will. Anyways, if I've been financially successful, my Medicare, my Social Security benefits are not going to grow as fast as they grew for my parents. And my Medicare could very well be the option of taking my Medicare money and using it to buy a private plan that works better, like Medicare Advantage works now for some people. These are not unreasonable changes, and they're not unreasonable changes to ask of us after everything our parents and our grandparents did for us. So this is what it's going to take to balance our budget. You have to combine that with dynamic economic growth, because the debt matters as a percentage of your overall economy. And if you can do the reforms to those programs and dynamically grow your economy in a sustained way, we can bring the debt under control. We can do it, but we got to do it now. The longer we wait, the harder it's going to be. And by the way, the longer we wait, the harder it's going to be to do it without making changes to the people that are on it now. And I never want to see that happen.
Do we keep the spending caps? And how do we avoid a shutdown?
Well, first of all, the problem with the spending caps are that they're not, it doesn't do anything to balance our budget. I do believe that we should keep in place the discretionary spending caps on non-defense spending, and here's why. National security is the most important thing the federal government does. In fact, that's the reason why we have a federal government. Okay? If your country's not safe, you can't grow your economy, you can't have better schools, you can't do anything if you're not safe. And the world has gotten really dangerous. You have a lunatic in North Korea with nuclear weapons. You have a radical Shia cleric in Tehran that's going to buy nuclear weapons. You have a gangster in Moscow who's dividing Europe. You have the Chinese hacking into our computers and taking over the South China Sea. You have radical jihadists in multiple countries, across multiple continents. They even recruit Americans using social media. We have to have a national security that allows us to protect against these things. And if you eviscerate your defense spending with the oldest and smallest Air Force, oldest and smallest Navy, the 40,000 positions eliminated from the Army, you are not going to be able to keep this country safe one day. So I think the spending caps should remain in place for domestic discretionary spending, but not for defense spending, because that's the first thing the federal government should fund. It's the most important thing the federal government does. But the caps won't be enough. That's only 30% of our budget. 70% of the debt spending is coming from the programs I described earlier for future generations. We have to get that under control, or we're going to have a debt crisis.
A lot of parents are worried.
I have to get those down to 1 minute for the debate, so I'm going to start practicing.
I'm glad to help. A lot of parents are concerned about the affordability of college for their children. The parents of this beautiful child right here are worried sick that we may not have the opportunity because it's just getting so expensive. How would you fix this problem, and what plan would you propose to help students pay back their loans?
3 things: choices, innovation, competition. We need to allow competition to enter higher education. 3 things we need to do. Number 1 is, we've been telling kids for too long, everybody has to go to college. That isn't, or we tell them this: technical careers are only for the kids that aren't smart enough to go to college. That isn't true. You know what those technical careers are for? People that want a job. People that actually want to make $50,000 a year at 18 years of age. There's no reason why we can't graduate someone at 18 years of age ready to work as a welder, making $60,000 a year. That's why I think we should open up federal financial aid. So young Americans, 16, 17 years of age, can go to high school in the morning and trade school in the afternoon, and when they graduate, they have a diploma and they're certified, ready to work fixing air conditioning units, fixing airplanes, fixing cars. Those are good paying jobs. A welder makes over $100,000 in the 21st century. The second thing is we need more choices. That's why I've proposed an idea that creates an alternative accrediting process for what's equivalent to college. so that you can package learning from a variety of sources, online work, credit for what you've already learned. If you've been in the military, you should get credit for what you learned in the military. If you've been working for 15 years in a law office, you should get credit for what you've already learned. Don't make people pay to take classes on what they already know. And then whatever you're missing, you should be allowed to learn it from a variety of different sources. And then for 4-year degrees, I think three things. Number one, I've offered an idea called the Student Investment Plan, that instead of getting a loan, allows you to get your tuition paid for by a private investment group in exchange for a percentage of your income. It's better than the loan because it doesn't go on your credit report. I think income-based repayment should become the automatic method of repayment for current loan holders. So the more you make, the faster you pay it off. The less you make, the less of a burden it is, but at least you're not defaulting. And I think before you take out a loan, moving forward, before you take out a loan, schools should be required to tell you how much people make when they graduate from that school with that degree. So you can decide if you should borrow $50,000 or $60,000 to major in Greek philosophy. Because there's nothing wrong with it. Maybe you're going to graduate school. But you know what? The market for Greek philosophers has tightened in the last 2,000 years. So you deserve to know that before you borrow $50,000 or $60,000 to pay for it.
Now, I'm going to ask, entre paréntesis, if my English-speaking audience can bear with us for a little bit, pero quiero preguntarle que, por favor, si me puede responder a la misma pregunta.
Pero en español.
En español, o sea, sobre qué hacemos como padres, o sea, del costo excesivo del colegio para nuestros hijos y nos preocupa, o sea, de que no va a ser posible para esta niña hermosa que está aquí enfrente de nosotros.
Es importante tener más flexibilidad y más diferentes opciones para los padres que están en esa situación. Por ejemplo, tenemos que tener más entrenamiento en estos trabajos que ya existen. Las personas trabajando que hoy en día saben arreglar un avión o poder trabajar como mecánico en un automóvil o toda una serie de trabajos que hoy en día hay escasez de personas con ese entrenamiento y no estamos entrenando a los jóvenes para hacer ese tipo de trabajo. Y debemos estar entrenándolo a los 16, 17 y 18 años de edad para que cuando se gradúen de la secundaria estén preparados para trabajar, no tengan que esperar 5 años o perderse en la economía. Segundo, más flexibilidad, especialmente para esas personas que tienen que trabajar y están creando una familia, de poder recibir crédito por lo que ya saben, lo que aprendieron a través de años de trabajo, lo que aprendieron en servicio militar, lo que han aprendido por su propia voluntad y lo que les falte, poder recibir ese entrenamiento a través del internet, a través de diferentes programas que existen los fines de semana, por las noches, etc. Y en términos de la educación tradicional de 4 años, etc., tenemos que crear más alternativas a lo que es un préstamo. Por ejemplo, poder recibir que un grupo de inversionistas privados paguen por su estudio y después uno le paga un porcentaje de sus ganancias a través de 10 años o 15 años. Eso es mejor que un préstamo, porque un préstamo puede arruinar el crédito de un individuo. Segundo, más información. Es importante que antes que un estudiante saque un préstamo, sepa cuánto es que ganan las personas cuando se gradúan de esa escuela con ese título que están buscando, para que las personas no sigan graduándose de programas que no existe, que el título no llega a trabajo, no resultan trabajos, pero están cuenta $60,000 en su totalidad de préstamos, que en muchos casos es lo que está previniendo que las personas puedan comprar una casa, empezar una familia o empezar un pequeño comercio.
Gracias, senador.
Ahora en portugués. No, yo no sé portugués.
Si fuese posible.
No, yo no sé portugués, no sé portugués.
I want to flip the conversation a little bit, and this is for my libertarian friends, on the issue of sugar subsidies.
Yeah.
Government subsidies for particular industries can be an example of government choosing winners and losers. You've defended sugar subsidies as necessary to level the global playing field. But on the other hand, you have also come out against the Export-Import Bank. What's the difference?
Well, Export-Import Bank, the difference is there's an alternative to the Export-Import Bank, and that's called loans. 97% of American exports do not rely on EXIM Bank for loans. And we have a banking sector in this country that, if allowed to participate and compete, not with a government monopoly, they would also be willing to provide loans for these programs. I don't like sugar subsidies. They exist for one primary reason, and that is because Brazil will wipe out our sugar industry, our agricultural industry, because they heavily subsidize their products. They heavily subsidize their products. And as a result, what they will do, and this is why this is so important in agriculture, if you have a piece of land that's used for agriculture, and I undercut your prices and put you out of business, what's going to happen to that piece of land? It's going to be developed. They're going to build houses on it. They're going to build stuff on it. And then when you decide in the future, okay, we want to go back into agriculture, the land is gone. And I think food security is critical for the future of our country. So I don't think we should have subsidies for countries that we have free trade with. And I think we should pass a law that says the minute those countries stop subsidizing their products, we'll start subsidizing ours. But I don't want to see agriculture eliminated in this country, because if you lose the ability to feed your people, you talk about energy security, think about food security. And if once you lose a piece of land that's being used for agriculture, you can't get it back. It gets developed and it's gone.
In the Senate, you supported the Gang of Eight bill on immigration reform that would have provided a path to citizenship for millions of undocumented immigrants residing in the United States. But you have recently promoted a piecemeal approach to immigration reform instead.
Yes.
I've made the argument that what we need to drive immigration reform is consensus, both from the left and the right. The Democrats don't get to define what immigration reform is,
right.
neither do Republicans. What will it take to reach consensus on immigration reform?
Well, first we have to understand we don't have an immigration problem, we have 3 immigration problems. Every year this country admits 1 million people legally. 1 million people legally to the United States every year. No other country comes close to that number. And yet despite that, you still have people that come illegally for a lot of different reasons. Second, you have a legal immigration system that's broken. It's expensive, it's bureaucratic, you have to wait 15 years, you have to hire lawyers, and quite frankly, it's not modern. And the third is you have 11 or 12 million people in this country that are here illegally. But you're not going to round up and deport 11 or 12 million people.
No.
And you're also not going to blanket award 11 or 12 million citizenship cards. You have to deal with all 3 of these things. The problem is you can't deal with all of them at once. I know, we tried. We don't have the votes. We don't have the support to do it that way. And every year that we keep arguing about this, this has been going on for 30 years. Yeah. So this is the only way that I think we can find consensus and move forward. The first step is we have to prove to people that illegal immigration is under control, that in fact it's not getting worse. That from here on out, from this point forward, the problem is under control. Not zero, but under control. Once you've done that, the second step is you have to modernize the legal immigration system. Make it easier, make it more streamlined, less bureaucratic, and quite frankly, increasingly more merit-based. Meaning we attract people to this country on the basis of what they can contribute or do economically, not simply whether or not they have a relative living here. And I say this to you as someone whose parents came here on a family-based system. But that was in 1956. The world has changed, the economy has changed, and we have to have a merit-based system that allows us to attract people on the basis of what skills they have. That's how you're going to be able to keep college students. That's how you're going to be able to keep the top graduate in physics at a university instead of having them move to Canada to compete against us. And once you've done those 2 things, I honestly believe, I really do, that the American people are going to be very reasonable about what do you do with someone who's been in this country for a long time and other than immigration has not otherwise violated our laws. If you're a criminal, I don't think anyone disagrees that criminals can't stay. But if you're not, then I think you have to come forward, pass the background check, learn English, pay a fine because you violated the law, start paying taxes, and you get a work permit. And the work permit allows you to live and travel legally in the United States, and you will have to be in that status for at least 10 years. And after the 10 years is expired, I personally, some people don't agree with me, but I personally support allowing people to apply for a green card if you've lived up to the conditions of those 10 years. Not through a special path, just like everybody else. But I just think that is the only way we're going to be able to solve it. There is the people that are going out saying, let's do it all at once, we don't have the votes. The support doesn't exist. You're going to spend another 10 years, and it's not going to be 12 million people. It's going to be 20. And by the way, we're talking about real people here. These are not just numbers. These are human beings with lives and families, and the country's being negatively impacted by it. We're also losing the global competition for talent. It makes no sense to me. You know that if you can throw 98-mile-an-hour fastballs, you're not going to have a problem getting a visa. You're not. If you're the best basketball player in the world, you're going to play in the NBA. But if you're the #1 graduate at some school, the valedictorian, you may or may not get a visa. It just depends whether we ran out that year. That makes no sense in the 21st century. So I do think we need to fix this. We can fix this. But we don't have the votes, and we will not have the votes to do it all at once, given the current political conditions. But I hope we'll move forward on it.
Your tax plan reduces the number of tax brackets from 7 to 2, 15 and 35%. Anyone making more than $75,000 would be moved into the top tax bracket.
Individual, not
individual.
joint,
Any
right.
individual. What do you see as the economic benefits to this plan?
Well, first of all, it depends. If you make $75,000 a year and have children, you'll pay less in taxes because we're increasing the per-child tax credit. And there's some people that don't like that. The Wall Street Journal doesn't like that. I'll tell you why I think that's so important. And maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. But you tell me. I'm raising 4 kids right now. It's expensive to raise kids in the 21st century. And parents that are raising children are doing a great service for this country. They are raising our future taxpayers. And so that's why I want to increase the per child tax credit. If you were to invest that money on equipment, you would get a tax break. But if you invested in a person, you don't. So I think we'd increase the per child tax credit. The other is that we would be allowed, if you're single, if you don't have children, you should be saving that money into a 401k and into a health savings account. That would also lower your tax liability. So the truth of the matter is there are people that are not going to move up to the bracket because they're going to be able to do these things. My plan is a tax cut for over 90-something% of Americans. The growth part of the plan is on the business side. And here's what we do on the business side, and this is also important for individuals. If you own a small business, you're probably in subchapter S, a pass-through. You're paying your taxes on your personal rate on your business. It could be as high as 39.5%. Under my plan, no business income, big or small, will be taxed at more than 25% flat. That makes us globally competitive. Every dollar you put into your business, that you invest in your business, you get it to write it off your taxes right away that year, not over 12 or 15 years. Small businesses may not be around in 12 or 15 years. We're going to have a territorial system of taxation, which means American companies that make money in another country, they only pay taxes once where they make that money. You know why that's important? Because we have $2 trillion of American corporate cash sitting in overseas bank accounts. You know what $2 trillion is? That's the size of the entire Russian economy, sitting overseas. If we could just bring half of that back to invest here, it would create jobs for people. So this is the growth part of it. And if we do this, the Tax Foundation has found, you will see over dramatic increases in growth. It would be revenue positive by the end of the decade. It would create an increase in after-tax income across every bracket in the tax code. It's a lot better than the complicated, expensive system we have now.
The reality of an America where Obamacare is the law of the land, how would you address the rising premium costs, the loss of doctor choice and clinic choice, and the cost shift from the insurance provider to the consumer? So, for example, if you're on the bronze plan, you pay up to about $6,000 out-of-pocket deductible.
Right.
Who can afford $6,000 before the insurance kicks in?
They can't, and they call my office and say, hey, I just got a bill from the doctor. I have Obamacare. Why am I paying $2,000? And I said, because you have a $5,000 deductible. You're not covered until you come up with $5,000. So in essence, you're not covered. And that's a problem. Here's the better thing. I think we should put Americans in charge of their health care choices. And here's how you do it. You say that whether your employer gives you the money, employers can still offer you health insurance. That won't be banned. But some employers may say, look, instead of offering health insurance, we're going to give you $1,000 a month to go out and buy your own health insurance. If they do that now, you have to pay taxes on that money as income. I say that money should be tax-free. If your employer doesn't give you that money, then I think you have a tax credit that allows you to have access to money that can only be spent on health insurance. And you should be allowed to use that money to buy health insurance from any company in America that will sell it to you, in any state. You know what that will create? Competition. It's not a perfect example, but I'll prove to you what it kind of looks like. Turn on your TV when you get home. I promise you that if you watch for a couple hours, you will see at least one commercial for Geico, State Farm, Prudential, Allstate, The General, Liberty Mutual. Who am I missing? Who's Flo with? Flo is Progressive.
Progressive.
Why are those people advertising? Why are there 9 or 10 companies advertising for your business on television all the time? I'll tell you why. Because who controls your auto insurance spending? You do. Not your boss, not the government. If there are millions of Americans that control their own health care spending, the private sector is going to create plans to compete for your business. And how are they going to compete? Higher quality, lower prices. That means they're going to find the best doctors and the best hospitals, and they're going to try to give it to you at a lower price. And I think where the government can help is at the state level through high-risk pools. If someone is chronically ill, that means guaranteed to get sick, that's where a high-risk pool could help individuals. And by the way, lower premiums for everybody else. But anyway, that I think is a much better approach than what we have right now.
Terrific, thank you. We're talking about business, and we're talking about job opportunities that are being created in the private sector, and how maybe certain regulations like Obamacare are hindering job growth and job opportunities for Latinos across the country. Innovation is one of the key sources of economic growth in a free market economy. And a little over a year ago, you spoke at Uber headquarters in Washington, D.C. about the valuable role that Uber is playing in entrepreneurship and market disruption. Nevada, for instance, just recently allowed Uber, or has introduced Uber. How will you protect innovators like Uber from the threat posed by established interests such as the taxi monopolies?
By limiting at the federal level, Uber is obviously facing local and state restrictions, but at the federal level, it comes back to what I said a few minutes ago. Large established industries love rules and regulations that make it impossible for a new business to compete with them. And this is particularly true in the 21st century. And we cannot allow that, at least we cannot allow federal regulations to be used as a weapon against innovation. And let me tell you, the prospects are extraordinary. About a year ago, my refrigerator broke, which is a catastrophic event when you have 4 children, everybody's scrambling. So it was in the late at night. I had to find somebody that can come fix it. What do? You go online, you Google refrigerator repair people. You have to call through 6 or 7 companies. Hopefully you can find someone who has warranty that can work that. There's this app called Handy. Handy, you basically go on the app, and it knows where you live because it's geolocated, and you put in what your need is, and it connects you with someone who fixes refrigerators that's available right now if you need them. Refrigerator's important. Imagine if it's a plumber. Yeah. Catastrophe, right? Or your air conditioning unit in places like Las Vegas or Miami. This is the kind of thing that technology is now making available. Platforms that connect a willing worker to a client quickly, and you don't need for many people, that means you don't need an office, you don't need to advertise. All you need is a license and access to Wi-Fi. So when a client needs you, you can be connected. You know what that's going to mean for millions of people? You know how many millions of people are going to be in business for themselves or make extra money after work by being able to make themselves available for the sharing economy? That's just a small-scale example of innovation. We can't allow government regulations to stand in the way of it. And because what will happen is the established refrigerator repair people, whoever they are going to write rules that say, no, that kind of stuff can't happen. It's too dangerous. We can't allow government to be used as a tool to keep out innovation.
In America today, a Hispanic child is more than twice as likely as a white child to have a parent in prison. It's a tragedy. There is a growing bipartisan coalition for criminal justice reform. Do you support these efforts, and what reforms, including proposals such as eliminating mandatory minimums, do you believe are necessary to reduce them?
Well, when it comes to violent crime, I still believe in mandatory minimum. When it comes to nonviolent offenses, I think it is important to do 2 things. One is obviously not lock people up for extended periods of time for issues that quite frankly don't deserve it. It's a budget issue and it's a societal issue. But here's the other, and that is early on. I really do believe at the state and local level, to the extent there are federal laws as well, in diversion programs early on. Because let me give you a typical story, right? You're 18 years of age and you do something really dumb and you get arrested. You don't have money because you're poor. So they assign you a public defender. That public defender has 4,000 cases that they're handling. So the public defender says to you, let's plea out. Plead guilty, you'll get time served, probation, and you're all done with it. What they don't tell you is, you have a record now. Now you've pled guilty, now you have a record. And that record now is going to keep you from joining the military, it's going to keep people from hiring you, and it stigmatizes you. I really think that we need to try to avoid as much as possible for young people to interact with the criminal justice system young. Do everything possible to prevent that stigma from attaching. Because once that happens, something happens. But people all of a sudden start to, you can't, now nobody will hire you because they look at your record. Or if you've served time in prison, now you get out and you've learned habits while being incarcerated next to hardened criminals that have impacted you as a person. So I really do believe that we need to do a better job because, you know what? If the person that got arrested is wealthy, they probably hired a really good lawyer who knows the prosecutors, and they probably got you off pleading to nothing. Just no contender or, a no plea whatsoever. And so it is an issue that disproportionately impacts those that cannot afford to hire hire counsel that can avoid them from having that stigma attached to them. And I hope we can find better ways to get around it. Obviously, it's primarily a state and local level issue, but when it comes to federal crimes, I would want to see us do more diversion of work, especially with young people and first-time offenders, to prevent people from falling into that cycle that they get sucked into.
Terrific. There's a saying that the more you subsidize poverty, the more poverty you get. There's also a statement that sort of resonated with me by Mark Stein when he said, when it comes to welfare, it's not so much the wasted money, it's the wasted lives. Both sides of the political aisle recognize that our current welfare system creates the wrong incentives, not working as intended, and subject to abuse. What would you propose doing to reform the welfare system to decrease poverty and increase self-reliance, self-sufficiency?
First of all, I actually think free enterprise doesn't work without a safety net. Safety net, not as a way of life, not as a lifestyle, but you need a safety net. Why? Because if someone's come across hard times, you've tried and you've fallen, this helps you get back up. People aren't going to take a risk if they think the cost of not succeeding is disaster. but it can't become a way of life. And here's what's happening. Our anti-poverty programs do not cure poverty. They alleviate some of the pain of poverty, but they do not cure it. It would be like breaking your arm and going to the emergency room and being given a lifetime supply of painkillers. What would your reaction be? You're not going to fix my arm? No, no, we're just going to take away your pain. That is what our anti-poverty programs have become, partially because it's run by the federal government as a one-size-fits-all. Here's what I propose. We take our anti-poverty money at the federal level, don't even cut it, just take all that money, put it into an innovation fund, a flex fund, and open it up for state and local communities to create their own anti-poverty programs that work in that community. Because every community has different factors that contribute to poverty. In South Florida, where I live, rural poverty and urban poverty in the same county have different issues behind it. In rural counties, it's access to housing. In rural areas, it's access to housing. In the urban areas, it's lack of access to transportation. We would allow not just the local communities, but the non-governmental sector, churches, synagogues, community groups to participate in creating programs that cure poverty. And here would be the only condition of receiving this money. If you are receiving public assistance and you are not disabled, if you're disabled, that's different, and you are not disabled, you either have to be going to school, which the assistance will help towards, or you have to be working. Meaning, if you're unemployed, I would rather you be working for $7, $8 an hour, and we'll make up the difference, than have you sit at home for $6 an hour equivalent and not working at all. Why? Because that person is now unemployed. That person is now unemployed, their skills are eroded, and when they go get a job one day, their employer's going to look at their resume and said, well, what did you do for 4 years? Oh, I sat at home. I'm not hiring him or her. So you you have to be going to school, because the only cure to poverty is a good-paying job. And we have to have an economy that creates more of those good-paying jobs, and we have to help our people get the skills it takes for those good-paying jobs.
I wanted to ask you, one of the themes that has not been brought up lately, or has been almost ignored, has been the issue of Latin America and the growth of progressive statist regimes. How do we turn that around? How do we reverse?
It hasn't been ignored by me. I've now been banned from Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Argentina. So I don't know who's next.
I suppose in general is what I'm talking about.
Okay. Yeah, they've a specific. I hadn't planned to go to Nicaragua anytime soon, but I've been banned from there. Argentina apparently as well. So we do have kind of 3 emerging movements in Latin America. One are states that, quite frankly, are on the verge of failure. They're struggling. Guatemala, Honduras, to some extent El Salvador, the Northern Triangle countries, face some transnational criminal groups that aren't just driving migration, they're undermining the state in parts of it. Then you have an arc of countries that are, they have their issues, but they're progressing, they're moving forward. Chile, Peru's got some tough issues going on, but generally their trends have been positive. Colombia, Mexico, with some vibrant growth, and Panama. And then you've got these countries that have headed into this radical left-wing direction, and you can see the economic performance of these countries. Venezuela, Cuba's been there for a long time, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Ecuador. And so we shouldn't ignore that, but I think we have to do a better job of paying attention to places like Colombia that are trying to do it the right way, and they face some significant challenges. But Colombia is a pretty good example of success. Colombia was a country that 10 years, 15 years ago was on the verge of failure, total collapse. And the United States, primarily the work was done by the Colombians, but we helped. Obviously, they had some great leadership. Álvaro Uribe provided some extraordinary leadership there, but we helped. Today, Colombia is not just one of our strongest ally in South America. Colombia is now involved in helping other countries confront their security challenges because they have experience with it. Now, they still have a guerrilla movement there, and they still face some significant challenges. But my point is that is the kind of thing we need to be pointing towards. And the other one is Mexico. Look, all the news that we hear, and some people like to criticize, I'm not naming any names, people say that. There's good news in Mexico, too. Mexico has a vibrant and rapidly growing middle class. There are areas of Mexico that are unstable and have transnational criminal groups that control it. But there's also a rapidly growing middle class in Mexico. That's great news for America because we have free trade with them, and they're a partner and increasingly a consumer nation. So I think we need to highlight the good news stories as well. And then my last point I would make is I do think we have a vested interest and involved in some sort of alliance that helps Guatemala and Honduras in particular confront the governance and security issues in those countries.
Terrific. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to take the questions from the audience itself. Thank you. Recently, some high-profile policymakers have made statements that alienate Hispanics who might otherwise be sympathetic to free market ideas. How can conservatives better engage and connect with Hispanics to advance free market ideas, which, by the way, 36% of Latinos self-identify as conservative?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is by discussing what we're discussing here today, the connection between limited government and free enterprise and upward mobility. And I said this earlier today, if I am born into a billionaire family, it doesn't matter how big or small the government is, I'm going to be able to afford to deal with it. I'm going to be able to hire the best lawyers, the best lobbyists, the best everything, and I may not like it, but I can navigate it. If you're the son of a bartender and a maid, if you're trying to start a business out of the spare bedroom of your home, big government crushes you. You have to get really lucky to be able to navigate all of that. We need to do a better job of convincing people that free enterprise is the only economic model in the world where everyone can be better off without having to make anyone else worse off. Every other economic model in the world says this: you have to give me the power to take away from him so I can give it to you. Free enterprise is the only economic model in the world that says you can continue to succeed and you can succeed as well. It's the only economic model in the world where we don't have to make rich people poor in order to make poor people richer. And that's our goal. We want everyone to be better off. And you can, only free enterprise allows you to do that. And we need to do a better job of telling that story because it happens to be true.
That's right.
Particularly those of us who have benefited from that reality.
So a question from the audience is, how should the federal government balance taking care of domestic issues with the need to protect democracy abroad?
Well, the issue of democracy abroad goes back to the issue of foreign aid. And look, not every country is going to turn into Australia or New Zealand. There's some deep issues engaged. For example, Syria. It's going to be a very long time before Syria is a country governed by one person and one government. It's just that country's lost half its population. 250 million people have died. That's the reality. You have areas in the world where it's going to take a significant amount of time to make that transition. I think of Jordan or Bahrain, where the majority of the country is being run by a government that's represented by a minority. And so if they move too slowly towards opening up in democracy, they're going to have a revolt. If they move too quickly, it could spiral out of control, but there has to be steady progress. There are examples of that around the world. The one I always point to is South Korea. Do you know that 35 years ago, South Korea was still a military dictatorship? And its economy was smaller than North Korea's. The South Korean economy was smaller and poorer than the North Korean economy. The U.S. remained engaged with South Korea. We helped nudge them and continue to move them towards opening up both their markets and their government. Today, South Korea is a donor to foreign aid, not a recipient. And they're the 9th largest economy in the world. That's an example of that sort of transition that we should be engaged around the world and involved in. It's one of the reasons why I'm a supporter of free trade. Now, we have to see the details of this new agreement. But trade with other nations that are developed economies is a rapid way to empower people and also strengthen governance. But we do have an interest in democratic opening. Because look around, here's my last point. I don't want to monopolize this answer, but look around the world today. Who's causing all the problems? North Korea, Iran, radical jihadists, Russia, and China. What do they all have in common? They're totalitarian states. New Zealand's not starting wars. Australia's not starting wars. None of the European democracies are starting wars. All the conflict on this planet is being driven by dictators and tyrants. And so that alone is a reason to want democracy to spread. The more democracies, the less instability we're going to have around the world.
Like Latinos, like all other Americans, believe that all issues are Latino issues. Which is why I love having this kind of forum, because we're able to talk about different issues. And here, this is one that I think is a high priority for a lot of folks. There has been a lot of talk about drug companies abusing their ability to raise drug prices. This affect small businesses through rising premium costs.
Yes.
Are there any free market solutions to fix the problem?
Yeah.
And I love the way he poses that question.
Absolutely. So there's 2 points that I would make. One of them is, here's what's happening. One of the things that's happening is you have a drug that treats MS, okay? And new drugs come online. And so doctors stop writing your prescription. They start writing the prescription for other drugs. And yet if you look at the books, even though people are using that drug less than they used to use it, you're making more money than you used to use it. They're just raising the prices and raising the prices. And so that's one of the things that's driving it. But here's the big impediment. It is so hard to get a generic approved once the patent expires that you don't have enough generic competition in the marketplace. It takes an average 58 months and millions of dollars in legal fees to get a generic approved, a generic application approved. And so if you have a drug, once the patent expires, and you decide, I can sell that drug at 1/4 of the price. It's the same drug that's been used. The patent is gone. We have the formula. By the time it costs so much money to do it, that people decide, we just won't do it. And so you're stuck with the name brand, and therefore they control the pricing on it. So we need to streamline the generic application process so that it's easier for generics to come online and compete with these drugs once the patents expire. And that alone would help drive down the cost of some of these medicines. Now look, there are some things being invented that are miracle drugs. Genetic medicine is important because they're going to be able to design a specific treatment for a specific tumor in a specific person. That's extraordinary new therapies. These things cost hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. And people are only going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in doing it if they're going to make their money back. We don't want to stop innovation. But at the same time, if no one can afford it, what's the point of having it? And so we've got to balance those two. And clearly, one of the ways we can help it is by streamlining the generic application process so that competition, once the patent expires, can quickly enter into the marketplace. That's just a sheer government impediment.
Flat-out question. What do we do about the folks that are here without proper authorization and the ones that continue to flow through the
Well, I've outlined that in the answer I gave earlier. As I said, you've got to do the other two things first. You're not going to be able to do anything about it until you prove to people that illegal immigration is under control. It's just the way it is. We don't have the votes. We do not have the votes. And we have less votes for it today than we did 2 years ago for a lot of different reasons. I've outlined what I think happens. I think you had to have been here for, you can't be someone that came yesterday. You had to have been here for at least 10 years. You can't be a criminal. If you're not, then you have to come forward. After you pass the background check, you have to pay a fine. You have to start paying taxes, showing that you're employed, and you get a work permit. And that's all you're going to have for at least 10 years. That's the same as the Senate bill had. And after the 10 years are expired, you're allowed, I believe, I'm open to allowing people to apply for a green card. And you would have to apply for it like anybody else would. And obviously, after you have a green card, in 3 to 5 years, you're eligible to apply for citizenship. That's the approach I'm open to. I think most Americans would agree with most of that outline, but I don't think we can even get to that point until we've done the other things I've outlined. The votes just aren't there.
What is your perspective on free college education?
Well, first of all, for people that are receiving 100% tuition benefits in different states, it is free. I don't think that that's necessarily the solution to the problem per se. The free college education they're talking about is at the community college level. Right. And if you look at the studies, the cost of community college is not what's locking people out. It's the flexibility. So for example, if you're a single parent raising a family but your kids are young, you can't go to college because if you're working, you can use the child care tax credit to put them in daycare. But if you're a student, you can't use the child care tax credit, which is why I believe we should allow the child care tax credit to be used by both students and parents. That's a real life impediment. The other is most people that are being impeded from going to school, if you're a non-traditional student, they can't go because they have to work full time. They can't quit their job to go to school for 2 years. And that's why I believe we have to have innovative programs that allow innovation and technology to allow people to receive credit for what they've already learned on their own and learn the rest by packaging learning from a variety of sources. Where the cost really begins to grow and where it really becomes an impediment from a cost perspective, other than the private schools, is at the graduate level. And that's why I have innovated this idea called the Student Investment Plan that allows you, instead of going to a loan, going to a private investment group that invests in you the way they would in a small company. And if you're financially successful, they make their money back with a profit. And you never owed money. It's not on your credit report. If you decide to drop out and go live in a tent, they made a bad bet. But the point, and they lost their money, but it's a lot better than a student loan is.
If you ask anybody, Cuban, Mexicano, Salvadoreño, women, male, doesn't matter. Number one priority for Latinos is jobs. In every poll, in poll after poll. The question here is, how will you ensure that there will be a variety of jobs to choose from when I finish school?
Well, first of all, you need leaders that understand that politicians don't create jobs. The private sector creates jobs.
Hear, hear.
And what we need from our politicians and our public servants are laws and policies that make America the easiest and the best place in the world to create the best paying jobs. It's not just enough to have jobs. They have to be jobs that pay enough to live off. Okay? Because we're technically at near full employment, but these jobs don't pay enough. So people live paycheck to paycheck. You have people working and are still on food stamps and government assistance. And so they're not making, we don't just need jobs, we need jobs that pay more. We need to make America the easiest and the best place in the world to create the best paying jobs of the 21st century. That's why we need to reform our tax code. That's why we need to bring regulations under control. That's why we need to balance our budget. That's why we need to repeal and replace the health care law, Obamacare. That's why we need to fully utilize our energy resources. If we can do that, we make America globally competitive. I am confident that the American private sector, represented by all of you here today, are going to not just create millions of new jobs, they're going to create millions of jobs that pay more. They're going to create jobs that haven't even been invented yet. And those jobs will pay a lot more than the jobs we've lost and a lot more than the jobs we have now. But we have to turn it over to the American private sector by giving them government policies that make America the easiest, the cheapest, the fastest, and the best place in the world to create jobs and start a business.
Yeah, let's get to it. I like it. How will your tax plan benefit working class minorities?
Well, the primary benefit, in addition to the fact that over 90% of Americans are going to see a tax reduction, most people are going to be paying only 15% at their rate, which is significantly lower than what they might be paying now. But the working families are going to see a significant benefit in the increase in the per-child tax credit, because raising children is expensive in the 21st century, and the tax code should recognize it. And people say, wasn't that a special break? No, you're keeping more of your own money. If you have a family of 5, it's more expensive than a family of 3 or a family of 2. And the tax code should recognize that. There is nothing, society doesn't work without strong people. You can't have strong people without strong families. And I'll tell you why, because it takes values to succeed. No one is born with values. No one is born with values. They have to be taught to you. And they have to be reinforced by the community around us. And while government can't do that, government shouldn't have any policies that discourage people from doing that. We have to get rid of the marriage penalty in the tax code. I support increasing the pro-child tax credit that I discussed. By the way, we should get rid of the marriage penalty in the safety net programs, too. People shouldn't lose their Medicaid because they got married to the father of their children. And so we need policies that strengthen the family, but we also need policies that do not undermine the community. And that's why religious liberties are so critical. Because we today have religious communities that feel like they are potentially on the verge of being targeted and singled out. And obviously, you may be aware of this, I'm running for president. If I'm elected, I intend to have an attorney general that will fight for and protect the religious liberties of our faith community in this country.
Before we break, I want to make sure that you answer the questionnaires that you have on your seats. I know you answered those questions before you registered, but we want you to fill them out again, and then apparently you're set up for some prizes if you fill them in. Le quiero agradecer al senador Marco Rubio por estar con nosotros. Thank you, Senator, for being with us today.
Prizes, a car?
It's an iPad, I think.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Thank you.